This is the tutorial for the Streat Dress. I'm going to start by doing the darts. At first I'm going to show you my front panels because it's got a grown-on facing, which means it's cut as one piece. You can see I've placed interfacing on the section that folds back as the interfacing, like so. So that fold line is where my interfacing starts. And this is my dart that I've marked here. I've got my 2 notches. I'm going to match those, fold it in half, find that pin. That's where my dart is going to finish. So I'll start stitching from the notches towards the pin, tapering off. Here we go. Back tack to start. And taper towards the pin, coming off where the pin was. There we go. Open it out, and you want to fold the dart in the fabric down towards the waist and give it a press. And I'm going to stay stitch this part of the neckline that hasn't been interfaced, just so that it doesn't stretch. So literally just doing a stitch quite close to the edge just to sort of hold it so it doesn't pull and stretch. That's my pressed dart, and there's my little bit of stay stitching. Repeat for the other piece. So now we're going to pop the backs together. There's a seam down the centre back of this bodice, so there's a little bit of shaping in there. So I can see I've overlocked the centre back seams already, placing those right sides together, neck to hem, give them a quick pin, and then I'm going to stitch my centimetre seam allowance. Here we go, back tack, centimetre seam allowance all the way down, back tack to finish. Taking out my pins, nice neat seam. Let's open that out. So I'm going to open this seam and give it a press. There we are, nice and flat. I'm going to give these neckline pieces a little stay stitch. That's what my seam looks like, all nice and flat from the right side. And again, I'm just quite close to the edge, about 5 mm. I'm just stitching just to stop it stretching in construction. So side and shoulder seams next. There's my back. I'm going to lay one of the fronts on top of there, right sides together again. Match up the shoulders and the side seams. So starting at the waist, popping some pins in, make sure the raw edges of the dart lie flush against the side seam there, so it's all neat. And then we're going to pin the shoulder, pin in the neck, pin in the cuff, and then pin in between. So, centimetre seam allowance along the shoulder. I'm going to follow this lovely curve a centimetre from the edge here too. So here we go, starting with a back tack, centimetre seam allowance, make sure that dart lies nice and flat as you negotiate that curve, back tack to finish, and then it's just a straight line for the shoulder seam. Back tack, 1 centimetre seam allowance as usual, and back tack to finish. There we go, take these pins out, nice seam. And this is the lovely curve. Now I'm going to overlock these edges, so before I do it I'm going to snip into this curve about every centimetre, centimetre and a half, just so that I can pull it open so that it lies in a straight line when I'm overlocking, because I want to pull it open while I overlock, so I've got those little gaps in it, so that when you're wearing it you can move freely. So there we go, that's the underarm curve done. Look, you can see I can pull it flat without it pulling or distorting, and this is the shoulder seam. So I'm going to press those seam allowances towards the back. There we are, there's that lovely nice flat curve under the arm, lying nicely because it's been snipped, and there's a nice shoulder seam too. So now let's take a look at this back neck facing. That's how my top will look with the facings folded in, the front facings. So if I just lay it out like that to start with and then open the fronts, you'll see I've folded it on that fold line. There's a little notch there, and that raw edge should meet the shoulder seam. So laying them out like that, then this piece, I've interfaced this by the way, will lay around the neckline like so. So I'm just going to flip it over and pin it together. You could see my interfacing there. And again on this side. So inside that inner curve is where your collar will go when we do that, but we're just going to stitch this back neck facing to the front facings to start with. So that's how it should look, a nice curve. I'm going to stitch the centimetre seam allowance on both sides. There we go, and I'm going to open it and give it a press so it'll lay nice and flat. Lovely. And the last job for this facing is to overlock from the front facing at the waist, all the way up and round the back of the neck, round that leaf edge of the back neck facing and down the other side of the front facing. So it's all one stitch line with my overlocker. You can zigzag if you don't have an overlocker. So there you go, you can see it's all neatened on that raw edge now. So next it's going to be the collar. 2 pieces to my collar, top collar and under collar. The under collar is the one that I've interfaced, the other one, the top collar, I've left plain. Right sides together. I've marked my halfway marks, again little notches, just so that I start pinning from there and work outwards. And there's one there as well. That will come in handy when you come to put your collar in as well. Matching the points and pin in between. It's this outer edge that we're going to be stitching. There we go, so starting there, all the way around the edge to there, and I'm going to be doing my little one stitch across the point, which basically just gives a little bit more space for your trim down seam allowance to go when you turn it through when it's a point. So here we go, pivot, one stitch, lift up your foot, put the foot down and carry on. So I'll show you close up when I've finished that basically that's just one stitch going across the point. There we go, back tack to finish. Let's take these pins out. Going to trim down, well I'll show you that point first, that you can see the one stitch across. I'm going to trim down the seam allowance on the corners, but I'm also going to trim by half the under collar, the interfaced collar. That part of the collar is the bit that goes next to your blouse. The bit without the interfacing goes on top. So trim all the way around by half, clip your corner again just like you did the other one. narrowing that seam allowance as much as possible where the point is without compromising your stitching. You don't want it coming undone. And then ever so carefully turn it through. I'm going to picket it with a bit of a pin, but do be careful that you don't ruin it at that point. I just find teasing it out with a pin helps a little bit. There we go. And then I'll be pressing the seam allowance as best I can towards the undercollar side, the side with the facing, and then folding it flat and giving it a press. So inside I'll be pressing that allowance that way on the flat, and then I'll be closing it up and giving it a little press so that the top collar is showing but not the under collar when you look at it from that way up. There we go, nice and crisp. Okay, so we're going to pop this collar in. You might incidentally want to stay stitch the edges of your collar down before you do this so that there's fewer edges to match. Now I've put my facing again where it's going to lie when it's finished. So I'm matching up, I've got my notch in the middle of my collar, I've got my centre back that matches to, and I'm going to take my bodice piece there, the neckline, and just attach those notches together. My centre back to my centre back notch for my collar, and I'm just going to find this next notch which matches the shoulder seam and pin those, and then I'm going to find the notch, that's it, the next one along, which is where the edge of my collar should go. There's one further notch to the left of that, a couple of centimetres on, which is your fold line. So this side again, find that notch for the shoulder seam, pin it, find the notch, the next one along, which is where the collar goes, and then I'm going to pin in between. So this is just to the bodice section of your top at the moment, just the blouse piece, not the facing. Centimetre seam allowance, start at one end of the collar and stitch a centimetre from the edge all the way around until you get to the other end of the collar. Okay, let's take these pins out. So that's the collar attached to the bodice part. Make sure it's all lying as flat as possible. There you go, centimetre seam allowance. And now I want to, just checking there's no tucks or anything. Now I find the centre of the inside of my back neck facing. That again is my notch there, and my centre back of my bodice. Pinning all those layers together there, and then working out, I want my shoulder seams again. So shoulder seam to shoulder seam, pop a pin in there. Okay, now this is where your fold line notch comes in. So you should have one more notch where it folds. Let's have a look, can't see it on that side. Have a look inside. There it is, that's my notch for my fold line. So I'm going to put a pin in there because I know that's where it needs to fold, and then I'm just going to reposition my pins. There we go, and ease that around the curve. Again, where's that notch? There it is, that's my fold line. Pop a pin in. That forms the revere of your collar. Shoulder seams, and then just pop in as few or as many pins as you feel you need, as it's a curve. If it helps, you can always put your centimetre seam allowance line on. There we go, that's the inside, that's the outside. Centimetre, or basically if you stitch from this side, you want to stitch on or just to the right of that existing stitch line where you stitched your collar on just now. So back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance, here we go. Just take your time with this and ease it round. making sure all your seam lines are flat as you go. So let's take those pins out and have a look. Check there's no rucks. Look, you can see I've stitched either on or just to the side of that initial stitch line there, all the way around. And I'm going to clip off any sort of bits from seams, any straggly bits. I'm clipping into my curves every couple of centimetres. Cut the corner off there for that little revere bit. Cut that one off as well. Clip into all the curves nicely. It's worth taking some time to do this nicely. There's another trim of the seam allowancy bits. And I'm going to cut down that facing, the interface facing by half again, just to reduce the bulk a little bit, because it will be quite chunky with that collar in there too. So trim it all the way along. And when you've done that, I'm going to be pulling that seam allowance all towards the facing. So up towards that facing, and then I'm going to stitch right on the edge of the facing into the neckline. Here we go. Look, I'll show you how I've done it. You can see I haven't done it all the way along. I've stopped about 4 centimetres past the shoulder seam, just to hold that main part of the facing back and down. Also, what I've done is I've pressed it, so that's the fold line, that's the notch where the facing folds back, and I've given that a little press so that it's a nice smart edge. You can see I did that to that side as well, gave it a quick steam. And also I've stitched in the ditch, I've stitched this facing at the back down the centre back seam and into the shoulder seams at the sides, look, just so that it doesn't ruckle up when you're putting it on and off. It's just right in the stitching in the ditch, as I call it, just to hold that facing down. So this is what we should have at the moment. Okay, a little bit of cuff prep next. 2 pieces rectangles for cuffs. I'm going to fold them and stitch the short edges together. So right sides together, short edges together, centimetre from the edge. There we go. So you've got a tube. Put my hand in to show you, and I'm going to open these seams out and press these flat. There we go. And then we're going to fold them in half. Wrong sides together, sorry. Right sides outside. Matching those seams together to form your cuff. There we go. A little bit of a fiddle. Going to pop a pin in, match those raw edges together and the seam. Pop a pin in there. Put one in there so they're nice and even. And then I'm just going to give them a little bit of a press. There we are, 2 cuffs. You can always stitch the raw edges together if that helps you for the next stage. So I've got my bodice here, I've got my cuff. I'm basically going to put my sleeve inside my cuff, and I'm going to match these seams. So this is my underarm seam, which I'm matching to the seams on my cuff, and give it a pin. Like I said, you can always stitch these cuffs together before you do this if that makes it easier for you. Then there's only 2 edges to match up rather than trying to fiddle the 3. Pin it all the way around. Should fit perfectly. And then I'm going to stitch mine from the inside, 1 centimetre from the edge, starting under the arm at the seam. All 3 layers together, all the way around. Take the pins out. There's my seam. I'm just going to overlock the edge. There we go, nice and neat. So next I'm going to turn it inwards and I'm going to stitch this seam allowance and pushing it towards the shirt or the blouse or the top, and I'm going to stitch on the edge of the actual sleeve, not the cuff. I'm doing this from the top. It just holds the seam allowance down so you don't see it, it's not going to poke out. There we go. Nice little edge stitch there, and then you're just going to fold your cuff back by half. I'm just going to give mine a little press, but you may want to secure yours if you're worried about them coming undone. You can always just pop a little tack or something in the top there and under the arm. So we're nearly finished with this bodice now. We're going to stitch the front. It's right over left, but hey, whatever you prefer goes. Find this notch. This is your centre front, the straight grain notch. And there's one there too, and you want to join those together. So it'll be marked on your pattern as the straight grain. And there's a notch at the bottom there. And then basically match up again the raw edges so that they're all meeting together. And I'm going to stitch up a little bit on this. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it's nicer. If you're super clever, you can stitch it from the inside. But I'm just going to do it on the top because that's easier and quicker and you can see it better. So maybe 3 or 4 inches, 10 centimetres, 8 centimetres, something like that is what I'm doing. I'm literally just stitching that down through all the layers. And then I'm going to just stay stitch these fronts together. So then I can just treat the bodice as one piece when it comes to putting the skirt on. There we go. I'm going to take those pins out and you've basically got a bodice. See my top stitching there and the securing stitch. That's what it looks like on the inside. So now we're ready for the skirt. So I'm going to show you how to put some pockets in. This is voluntary. If you don't want pockets, you don't have to have pockets, but everyone seems to love them. So there should be a notch about 5 centimetres, 6 centimetres down from the waist there. And I'm going to place my pocket bag top to that notch and match the edges down the side, give it a quick pin. There we go. So I'm stitching my centimetre seam allowance from the edge, but also I'm starting about 1 centimetre down from the start of my pocket bag, and I'm going to stop short by about 1 centimetre at the bottom of my pocket bag. There we go. So we've got a little bit that's free there and a little bit that's free at the bottom as well. So I'm going to overlock this bit. So I've sort of snipped in a little bit to where it started stitching and where it stopped stitching, and I've overlocked that edge. Now I'm going to fold my pocket over, give it a quick press, and I'm going to stitch the seam allowance to the pocket bag just on the edge there. So starting the centimetre or so down again. Oh. Make sure you're going through the pocket bag and the seam allowance and stop 1 centimetre before you get to the edge. There we are, that'll just hold everything down neatly. So you want to do that on each side of both sides of your skirt. So now we're going to sew the side seams. Your front skirt and your back skirt should look exactly the same. You've basically got elephant ears on there now. So right sides together, pin them together, place those pocket bags on top of each other. Starting at the waist, pin all around the outside of the pocket bag, and then from underneath the pocket bag to the hem. And stitch your centimetre seam allowance all the way around, and all the way down. And you just want to make sure that when you get to this point, you come down and stitch just to the left of that stitch line there before going all around your pocket bag. And when you come back, you want to come just to the left of that stitch line there before you come down. So here we are, centimetre back tack before you start, just to the left of that stitch line, pivot, go around your pocket bag, and then as you're coming to the bottom of your pocket bag, again pivot and stitch to just to the side of that stitch line again. So as you come down the side seam, you should just be to the left of that stitch line. Oh, a bit stuck there. That's it. A little bit bulky there. All the way down to the hem. Okay, so let's take these pins out and you can just see there and there. Let's take that pin out. There we go. Yeah, you can just see it's just to the left of that stitch line and down. So next I'm going to overlock the outside edge so that it's not raw anymore. All the way around. There you go, needs a press, but all the way around the pocket bag to the hem. And then you want to press your seams towards the front because that's the way your pockets will want to lay. So it doesn't matter which way because your front and back are the same at this point, but just make sure you press both your seams towards one side so that you get a front and a back. And there you go, you can see it's a nice pocket. Next we're going to put the pleats in. So I've tried to put some pins in so that maybe you can see better than, that's my centre, put my sides together. So I thought these might show up better than the notches. Anyway, let's give it a try. So that's my side seam. That blue pin is my centre front. So forget about that one, move to the next one. So 2 together and pull the pleat behind to the left and pop a pin in next to. Put those together and pull the pleat behind to the left and pop a pin in. And do the same for these 2 pink ones, put them together and then pull that pleat behind to the left. So each one of those pins is a notch. There we go. So you should have 1, 2, 3. 3 pleats, and that's the centre. So we're going to try again on this side where I've just got notches, so you won't be able to see so clearly, but trust me. 2 notches, put them together, pull the fabric to the right this time. Next 2 notches, put them together and pull the fabric behind and to the right again. Next 2 notches together, pull the fabric to the right, behind and pin. So you should have a mirror image now. You've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that pin in the middle is your centre front. I'm just going to pop a stay stitch in these so that I don't lose them, and that then I just have to fit the skirt to the bodice rather than trying to fiddle with pleats at the same time. So this is what it looks like stay stitched. You can see that'll just hold it enough to pin it to the bodice later. So you want to do the other side basically the same. Let's turn it around. That's my centre. 2 notches together, pull the pleat to the left and just keep going. So now I'm putting my bodice and skirt together. I've got my bodice inside out, inside the skirt. So I've matched my centre fronts and I've matched my side seams, and you can see they're right sides together. So the skirt is inside out, but the bodice is kind of right side out. And I'm just going to find this centre. That was my centre back and my centre back seam. I'll match those together. And then I've got these pleats, which should fit pretty snugly. As you can see, I've matched my side seams there. So there's not really any ease now. If there is, you can take that up in your pleats if you need to have a little fiddle with those, but they should work out perfectly. Pop a pin in each pleat and do the same for the other side. Again, you can see the side seams are pretty well matched. And the skirt and the bodice are the same length, so I'm just going to pin them together on a pleat. Just have a little fiddle with that side seam, make sure it's exactly on point. And then I'm going to sew all the way around. When I've pinned all my pleats down, 1 centimetre seam allowance from the inside. Off we go. So when you've stitched all the way around on the inside, take all your pins out, make sure there's no tucks or gubs of fabric anywhere, and give it a nice overlock or a zigzag to finish it off nicely. There we go. And then you can turn it through and have a double check that there's nothing untoward that's been caught up. Perfect pleats. Give that a steam. Finally, the hem. You'll already have decided what length you want your skirt, presumably, so I am going to overlock it and turn it. You can turn and turn if you'd prefer, but for speed I am going to just overlock, turn it up 1 centimetre and stitch it all around. Nice simple hem. There we go, that just needs a press now. There we go, that looks much better. Nicely pressed. And there you go, congratulations, you have made the street dress, which should look a little something like this. Enjoy.